What up, guys? Swift here. Today, I'm predicting what our 53-man roster would look like if we were to start the season today. Now, I do take a little bit of my own expertise into this as well, but I also kind of pair it with what I've seen from the coaching staff and what my expectations are. So that's for a guy like Sam Mustipher, who to me, I would probably cut him and have Dieter Iceland starting at center, but it looks like the coaching staff has their mind made up and Sam Mustipher is probably going to make this roster, so I take things like that into account as well. So let's get right into it. At quarterback, it's so easy. We're keeping two guys. It's Justin Fields and Trevor Siemian. Fields will be our QB1, Siemian will be our QB2. Good luck, Nathan Peterman. At running back, I have us keeping three halfbacks and one fullback for four total. I see David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, and Treston Ebner making the roster with Kari Blasingame at fullback. I don't see much happening here outside of that unless injuries creep into the regular season. Treston Ebner and Kari Blasingame are both currently out with injuries, opening the door for Darrington Evans and Jake Tongas to make the roster if they don't return soon. At wide receiver, typically teams keep six wide receivers. A lot of times that final spot goes to a special teams guy. I think Darnell Mooney, Bayless Jones Jr., Equanimous St. Brown, and Tajay Sharp are locks to make the roster. Byron Pringle is right there as well, but he hasn't shown me quite enough yet, but his contract does justify it. And then to me, the final spot would belong to N'Keal Harry. Barring his return, but the door is open for someone else to make the squad. There is also a small chance that we carry seven receivers into the season. I'm also just not 100% sold on Byron Pringle locking up his roster spot, but right now we have Kevin Shaw, Isaiah Coulter, Nasimba Webster, Chris Fink, and Daz Newsome all competing for that final spot. It will most likely go to whoever stands out the most on special teams, but this position group is most likely to be shaken up before the season starts. Pringle, Harry, and Sharp are all missing time right now, and I expect Ryan Poles to keep his eye on the waiver wire. There's definitely a chance we will see another wideout added before the season starts. Stay tuned as this position group has not finalized itself just yet. At tight end, I expect us to take three tight ends into the season. I guess there is a possibility that if Chase Allen stands out enough, he could force them to bring a fourth, but for now I see Cole Kmet, Ryan Griffin, and James O'Shaughnessy filling out one of our most underrated position groups. I love our tight end room. Offensive line is where it gets interesting and things might get tricky. Poles spoke earlier in the offseason about carrying 10 offensive linemen into the year, but most teams usually only carry 9. I see 8 guys that I would consider locks right now. Braxton Jones, Cody Whitehair, Lucas Patrick, Kevin Jenkins, Larry Borum, Riley Reef, Sam Mustipher, and Jatari Carter. That ninth spot would probably go to Michael Schofield, and then if we kept 10, that spot would go to Zachary Thomas. This is where things get interesting. There's a chance that Schofield could be cut. There's also a chance that Zachary Thomas gets cut if the coaches haven't seen enough from him. And then the long shot here is Dieter Iceland. I'm currently breaking down his tape from last week, but I like him more than Mustipher. It looks like Musty will start the season at center, but things could happen between now and then, and I haven't ruled Dieter out yet. I don't think that Julian Davenport, Sean Coleman, or Gene DeLance have much of a chance to make the roster, and then Lachavious Simmons is battling Zachary Thomas and Michael Schofield for one of those last spots. Keep an eye out on Dieter, Zachary Thomas, and Lachavious Simmons in this final game. So currently on the defensive line, I believe we have 8 roster locks. We will probably take 9 defensive linemen if I had to guess. The locks are going to be Robert Quinn, Travis Gibson, Al-Quadin Muhammad, and Dominique Robinson at defensive end, and then Justin Jones, Kyrus Tonga, Angelo Blackson, and Mario Edwards Jr. at defensive tackle, and then the last roster spot is between Trayvon Coley, Micah Treadway, and Mike Pennell Jr. I feel like all three have played very well, but I am highest on Trayvon Coley, and with his 3 sacks in 2 games, I believe he should have a roster spot locked up. It's even possible that Coley has his roster spot locked up and Mario Edwards Jr. doesn't, but I feel like Mario should make the roster. Mike Pennell and Micah Treadway are both intriguing options and having good camps. This will be another battle to watch over the next week or two. We will probably take 7 linebackers into the 53. I would say that this one might have some jobs up for grabs still. If I had to predict our 7 linebackers right now, it would be Roquan, Nicholas Morrow, Matt Adams, Joe Thomas, my boy Jack Sanborn, my other guy DeMarquise Gates, and Noah Dawkins. This would leave Caleb Johnson battling for the final spot versus Dawkins. My surprise is that I think both Jack Sanborn and DeMarquise Gates have done enough in my eyes to lock up roster spots and should make this team. Most teams carry 10 defensive backs on the roster. I would imagine we want to go 5 cornerbacks and 5 safeties here, but I think it's also possible we take 6 corners and 4 safeties. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I think Jalen Johnson, Kendall Vildor, Tyler Gordon, Thomas Graham Jr., and Lamar Jackson are making the team at corner, leaving Tavon Young, Duke Shelley, Jalen Jones, Bo Pete Keys, and Greg Stroman Jr. battling for that final spot versus one of the safeties. I think Lamar Jackson has played well through 2 preseason games, and I currently see him making the team. Tavon Young and Duke Shelley both could make the roster, but currently are battling for a spot. I love Tavon Young's potential, but I haven't been too impressed with him thus far as a Bear. I see us bringing 4 or 5 safeties. I believe the last spot is going to be a battle between Dane Cruikshank and those cornerbacks I mentioned above, like Tavon Young and Duke Shelley. Dane Cruikshank seemed like a guy that would make the roster, but he hasn't made much of an impact yet. I see us keeping Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker, DeAndre Houston Carson, Elijah Hicks, and possibly Dane Cruikshank. I think the last DB spot is going to be a battle. If I had to guess right now, I would lean towards keeping an extra cornerback over Cruikshank, as he hasn't made any kind of impact that I've seen. And then our 3 special teams guys are locked in. We have Cairo Santos at kicker, Hunter Trenton Gill, and longtime long snapper Patrick Scales. So after watching tape on both preseason games and looking over the roster with as much detail as I could, if I had to come down with a 53-man roster today, this would be my version of the Bears 53. At quarterback, I have Justin Fields and Trevor Siemian. At running back, I got David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, and Treston Ebner. My fullback is Kari Blasingame. My wide receivers are Darnell Mooney, Bayless Jones Jr., Equanimous St. Brown, Byron Pringle, Tajay Sharp, and my final wide receiver would be N'Keal Harry. At tight end, I would have Cole Kmet, Ryan Griffin, and James O'Shaughnessy. My offensive tackles would be Braxton Jones, Larry Borum, and Riley Reif. My centers would be Lucas Patrick and Sam Mustipher, although I would be very tempted to keep Dieter Iceland over Sam. My guards would be Cody Whitehair, Tevin Jenkins, Jatiri Carter, Michael Schofield, and Zachary Thomas. And then moving on to the defensive side of the ball. At defensive end, I would have Robert Quinn, Al-Quadin Muhammad, Travis Gibson, and Dominique Robinson. And then a defensive tackle, Justin Jones, Angelo Blackson, Kyrus Tonga, Trayvon Coley, and Mario Edwards Jr. My linebackers would be Roquan Smith, Nicholas Morrow, Matt Adams, Joe Thomas, Jack Sanborn, DeMarquise Gates, and Noah Dawkins. At cornerback, I would keep Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, Kendall Vildor, Thomas Graham Jr., and Lamar Jackson. And then at safety, I would keep Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker, DeAndre Houston Carson, and Elijah Hicks, with Cairo Santos, Trenton Gill, and Patrick Scales as my specialists. I left one extra spot for a defensive back here where I would be choosing between Dane Cruikshank and one of the cornerbacks. I couldn't make that final decision, so I left that one spot open. Also with this roster, since I'm choosing to bring Byron Pringle and N'Keal Harry onto the roster, if either guy's not ready to open the season, I would place them on the PUP and be able to bring 1 or 2 other wide receivers like Adaz Newsome onto the roster as well. Overall, this is my take for the 53-man roster right now. We'll see how it shakes down over the next couple of weeks, but I was kind of excited to go over it. It is hard to get down to 53 players, really hard. I heard the CHGO guys did this, Nicholas Moreno. Apparently, he got down to 50 players and had to find players to add. I guess that's what happens when you don't know who guys like Trayvon Coley are. But for me, it was extremely hard to get this roster down to 53 players. There's multiple players that I cut that I want to keep around. That's something we could talk about in another episode. But over the next couple of weeks, Ryan Poles does have to cut this roster down to 53 men, and it's going to be tough. So there you have it, guys. That's my take. If we had to break down to a 53-man roster today, there are going to be some intriguing cuts made over the next couple of weeks, and we may even add a guy or two or make a surprise trade. So keep your eyes peeled. But anybody not listed on that current 53 has to make an impression this weekend if they want a chance to make this roster. Stay tuned, guys. I have a lot more coming, including breaking down Dieter Iceland's tape. I know you guys want to see that. Stay tuned, and until next time, bear down.